speaking to Lara Dearman, and we are so excited to have her on board. Lara is the author of Devil's Claw and Dark Sky Island, which are two crime fiction books which combine myth and folklore with all the ingredients of a really great crime novel. Originally from the UK, Lara now lives in New York with her husband and 3 children, where she's working on her next book. Lara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome.
Great.
We're so excited to have you on board, and we wanted to kick off by kind of asking how you got into writing, because we know that you started your career doing something different. I think you started in finance and you did international relations and French, and then here you are as a crime writer. So how did that happen? What was the journey?
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd journey. I think I'm just one of many people that never really found my niche at school. Like I liked lots of different things, and I wasn't really aware of being a writer as a career option. I guess in hindsight, I probably should have looked into journalism or publishing. But I just, coming from Guernsey, which I don't know if a lot of people know, is a big finance center for sort of offshore finance. A lot of people in Guernsey do end up working in banks. And I took a year out before I went to university and worked for a private bank then. Then I went off and did my degree in international relations and ended up kind of naturally going back into finance because it was just something that I knew, and you know the pay's quite good, and it was quite a glamorous life living in London working for the big banks, but I guess ultimately not really for me. I'm quite quiet creative soul, and it just wasn't particularly satisfying career wise. So I ended up, after taking a long break having kids, I ended up going to do a master's in creative writing at St Mary's University in Twickenham. And that's where I started writing The Devil's Claw, like really literally as my assignments, you know, every week 10 in 2,000 words. And it all had to be, the St Mary's creative writing MA is great in that it's completely tailored towards writing a novel. So pretty much everything you turn in is a section of the novel that you're working on. Several people on the course had started one already. I actually hadn't. So I kind of wrote 3/4 of it over the course of the MA, and towards the end of it managed to get an agent and then a publishing deal. So I was really just thrown into the whole thing.
Well, we were going to ask you that actually specifically is, you know, because that's very seamless. But like, was it part of your course, would you say, was that they taught you how to reach out to people and who to reach out to? And did they hold sort of networking events, or did you have to go through the whole sending out your manuscript to different people and go down the cover letter route also?
I never did do that. I was extremely lucky, and it's a little bit of not really a coincidence, but they did host some sort of industry events, and my now agent, Sophie Lambert, was one of the agents who came in to talk to us.
Wow.
And she happened to be the agent to my tutor and sort of mentor, David Saville. So my manuscript got into Sophie's hands through my tutor, actually. And it was just one of those things, when she came to talk to us towards the end of the masters, she sort of said she was looking for atmospheric crime fiction, which was what I hoped I was writing. And then she saw, I think, just the first 3 chapters of my book and asked to see the rest. By which point I'd moved to New York, actually, which was kind of awkward. But so we sort of set up the relationship through that, really. She read the whole book, and then I spoke to her on the telephone, and job done. So I never went through that horrible nail-biting experience of drafting cover letters and submitting to multiple agents. It was, as you said, it was really annoyingly seamless.
Wow.
Not for me, but I know for others who have had to go through this horrible process.
Yeah, gosh, we haven't heard many that have had such a seamless when such a quick process as well. That sounds like a really efficient delve into writing for you.
It was, and it wasn't. I don't think I ever set out to do the creative writing course, you know, to get published. And I think there were other people on the course who probably were more ambitious than me. And I did it really as a way of resetting, you know, after doing the whole finance thing and then taking a long time off with the kids, I felt a little bit brain dead, really. And I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do to kind of wake myself up and do something just for me? And I've always loved reading, and I've always loved writing, and it just, you know, it just all happened very organically, I suppose.
Well, it sounds like you had a real just natural talent for writing. I mean, isn't that amazing that you chose it as sort of like a sort of re-step, and then suddenly by the end of it, you've already got a publishing, like you've already got a lit agent. That's incredible.
I know, it was incredible and it was amazing. And I'm so glad that it happened. On the flip side, it sort of turned something that I'd done as a like no pressure thing for myself to like, think about what I wanted to do with my life, having had my kids quite young and then finding myself in my like mid-30s thinking, what am I going to do? All the kids are at school. Suddenly the course, which was all for my creative enjoyment and everything, turned into like a job like, without me really intending it to be that, which in one sense was amazing because I got the publishing deal and it was just so great to earn a little bit of money doing something that I was really enjoying. And but on the other side of it, I suddenly felt like I had the pressure to write book 2 and it wasn't something that I was just doing for fun anymore.
And did that change your approach to writing and your process, how you felt about it? How did you respond to that pressure?
I think I work quite well under pressure. That was something that I'd forgotten, having been out of the workplace for quite a long time, but I've always been quite a swot and liked to swat up for exams and all that kind of thing. And I think doing the MA, I produced a lot of work quite quickly because I had the pressure of deadlines. And then I got the publishing deal with Trapeze and I had to produce the second book in quite a tight time frame. I think maybe had 8-9 months. And again, I feel like that suited me. Like I was very productive. I would get the job done. And in very stark contrast, having not been under contract for this third book, I've been dabbling away at it for rather a long time.
Well, that sounds like a perfect intro to you to sort of give us a little bit. So you've obviously written these 2 crime fiction books, which are based in 2 different islands, which actually, first of all, you talk to us about that, because I think that sort of, you're talking about atmospheric crime and that's something that you were really passionate about writing, and obviously that's exactly what you wrote. Do you feel like those islands that you chose, obviously Guernsey is where you're from, do you think they really fed into the atmosphere, and did you think living there almost inspired that genre?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I did always read a lot of mystery. I mean, I started off, I've talked about this before, but I think my first real love, book love, was for Enid Blyton's Famous Five series. And I think I really wanted to write like a grown-up Famous Five kind of thing, adventures and islands and castles and all these kind of really atmospheric settings. And so I tried to put my main character in. I just thought Guernsey really lent itself to that kind of adventurous mystery atmosphere, because it has all the Second World War history and all the old buildings, and it does have these sort of fortifications and bunkers and underground tunnels, and just seemed like the perfect setting, for someone to have quite an atmospheric journey, which is what I hope my protagonist had. And then Sark, the second island, was the place that I spent all my summers as a kid. And, different to Guernsey in that it's much, much smaller. But again, has that, I think, that kind of Enid Blyton atmosphere. The little abandoned coves and rocks and cliffs. And
is it the setting and the kind of props in it, like you're saying, that give you the ideas? Is that where the inspiration comes from, or do you find that your ideas strike you in different places? Which comes first?
I think certainly for the first 2 books, it was the setting that inspired the writing. And even though I said I wasn't really working on the book until I started the MA, I first started thinking about writing a crime series set in the Channel Islands when I was living in Singapore, which was just about as far away as you could possibly get from, for home for me. And I was at that time feeling very homesick. And I think that's when I started thinking about writing, maybe to make me feel a little closer to my home.
And do your characters come... Where do your characters come when you're plotting out the story? Do they come first? Do they sort of develop as you think about the different scenarios that you might put them into?
I think for my characters, and I'm not sure if all writers do this, but I was a bit of an Amdram fanatic when I was at secondary school. Certainly I was in like the theatre club and I did youth theatre and stuff. And when I'm writing characters, I usually do that whole putting myself in the characters. Like I sort of write as if I'm the character, like a little bit like I'm acting it out.
So, okay, so give us a good example of how would you give us a character and like how would you get into that character's like frame of mind?
Well, the best one for that was the best example of that I think is in The Devil's Claw. Jennifer Dorry was the first character that I started writing, and I guess as the main character and a woman just a few years younger than me who had lived away from Guernsey and then returned under kind of difficult circumstances, she's obviously not me, but she's much closer to me than any of the other characters in the book. And I found her really quite hard to write because you're trying to remove yourself from her, but also to make her likable. And it's hard to think about what makes you likable and then put that on a page, you know. So it was I found that really difficult. When I sat down to write the first chapter from the serial killer's point of view, it was like, honestly, steam was coming off the keyboard because I just had this amazing, like, oh, he's like this. And I just sort of was, it sounds really weird, but I was pretending to be him, like while I was writing it and just really enjoying the idea of this really quite awful person. But I found like I could get really dramatic with it and just sort of, I don't know, I just find it much, much easier to pretend to be someone than to draw on my own experiences and my own character.
And is that's kind of the fun bit about plotting a character, I would imagine, that you do, because especially when you're writing crime fiction, you do get to write a character who is so different from you and maybe doing all the things you'd never do. And it's kind of invigorating, maybe.
I love that about it. And I found the same thing, even writing Michael Gilbert, the detective, who's a really nice guy, but again, very different to me. And I guess I did have a couple of real people in mind in the way that they spoke and the way that they moved when I wrote him. But again, I found that much easier and freer writing, imagining people that are very different to yourself.
Amazing.
And then once you've made the characters, are they so sort of fully formed that you know how they're going to respond in certain situations? And does that ever affect the storyline, or do you just plonk them in the storyline and see what will happen?
Yeah, I'm not a plotter. I have the characters and then they just, I mean, I always think it sounds really affected, like, oh, I have to see where the characters take me, because obviously I'm taking the characters places. But I do, when I'm in the flow, definitely, I do find that I'm writing what the characters are saying and it's coming to me quite naturally because I am in my head sort of pretending to be them. Yeah. I think, what would this person do next? And that's how I construct the plot. Well, I was just going to say, it makes second drafts quite difficult because often at the end of the first draft, there's quite a lot of plotting that still needs to be done, you know, to make it a satisfying mystery. You know, mysteries and crime thrillers, you know, I'm not saying they're all formulaic, but there are certain things that you have to deliver. So I certainly found like the first structural edits on both the books quite difficult because I had to go back and sort of make people fit the things that people wanted from that sort of
so it's almost like a reversal. Instead of what would the character do, you're then having to be like, how can I make the character believably do that?
Yes. And how can I deliver that, you know, that kind of midpoint moment, right? Which might not necessarily have been there because that's not actually where the characters went, but you know that you need it for the book to be a satisfying read.
And I'm really interested in your perspective on this, Lara. What makes a great mystery or crime thriller? And I know there are some sort of technical things that you expect in the plot, but what do you think really are the critical elements of a great mystery suspense book?
I think for me, it's all about character. I really need to but I really need to believe in the main character, presuming if it's a mystery that the main character is some kind of detective or someone who is uncovering the mystery. I really feel like the reader has to believe in them and want them to succeed, and be rooting for them. And I'm less bothered about. I'm actually not so bothered about the big reveal at the end. Whether or not it's a big shock or a big twist. I think mystery books can sort of end very satisfactorily without having to have a big shock or twist at the end. Mm-hmm. A lot of the mysteries and the crime books that I like to read are actually sort of more quieter, I would say. I love Barbara Vine, for example, which I guess goes more into the psychological side of things. But a lot of that's in the quality of the writing and the depth of the characters. That's not to say I don't love a big twist and a big reveal.
Well, we were actually going to ask you what your top crime authors are for everybody who's watching and listening. So actually, you've just mentioned one. Is there anybody else that you, time again, will just, every time a book comes out, you have to read it instantly, or what, someone you would reread?
I think, and I love reading all sorts of mystery and crime, and I do like P.D. James, and a lot of, I think a lot of the old ones are great. I love Agatha Christie. As far as contemporary crime writers, so widely. If you're talking about like the books that I would have on pre-order, I love Cormoran Strike series. I love Robert Galbraith's, J.K. Rowling's. Those are the ones that I will order in hardback as soon as they're available. And I have quite a lot of friends in the crime writing.
Can't pick favourites.
I don't want to pick too many favourites, but like I love Ellie Griffiths. I think she's just great at the mystery and the character, and she's brilliant.
She's brilliant.
What about reading generally? Like, are there any books that you would say really shaped you or influenced you as a person, you as a writer, and kind of keep you inspired to write?
I feel like I read books all the time and I just feel blown away by them. And sometimes that's not a good thing from a confidence perspective. When you read just brilliant books, and you're just like, I can never do that. If you're talking about stuff that I read when I was younger, a lot of the great, like I loved Lord of the Rings when I was younger. Those are one of the series that inspired me to write. Like I said, Agatha Christie. Stuff that I've read recently, Sally Rooney. I think she's just like I read Normal People and just cried, and it wasn't even that it was sad. It was just I think maybe it's because I was sad, because I was like, why? Like I could never write that. I just thought it was beautiful. But again, she's someone that really splits opinion. So
we don't understand how she splits opinion, but somehow she does. Surely she's just the best writer ever. But
I read people saying I don't get all the fuss about. What's wrong with you?
How? You know what a really good question could be is, what would you, if you weren't writing crime fiction, and I know this maybe is a question about maybe the next books you're planning, what genre would you like to delve into?
Well, what I'm writing now, Lauren, is more of a, I don't know, what does Leah Moriarty write? What genre is that? I really like that, exploring people's interactions, particularly, I guess it's women's fiction, isn't it? Because it deals with women mostly, but I just...
Bit of a thriller edge though, isn't it? There's a thriller.
Yeah, a little bit of thriller edge. I like books that really explore people's relationships and kind of also the darker side of people's personalities. So I know, like Donna Tartt, right? That kind of thing, where you're putting maybe not very nice people in like really uncomfortable situations, which is what Barbara Vine does as well, doesn't she? You get these sort of like quite nasty people, and then you put them under a lot of pressure, and you just see like what happens.
You watch them crack.
Yes, I love that kind of thing. I love books that really explore the darker side of people's nature.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Lara, was what would you say to anybody that is looking to get into writing now, or is feeling like they might not be good enough to do it, or just really wants to break through that barrier but doesn't know if it could be for them? What would you say? Because there's seems to be a big confidence barrier for lots of people about actually putting pen to paper and sharing their work with people.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you feel like you want to write, obviously the best advice I can give is to sit down and write. But confidence is a huge issue, and for me, I never would have had the confidence even to sign up for the MA actually if I hadn't done a short course at Richmond Adult Community College. It was 11 weeks, and I think from there that was the first space I'd ever shared any of my writing, and just that tiny little boost, just presenting something and not having the room go, oh, that was terrible, which obviously they never would in that environment, but it's the kind of thing that as a writer you fear when you put your work out there. So I think if you can form a writing group, that's great, or find any kind of safe space to share any of your writing, really, just to help get your confidence up. Because if you do want to be a writer and you want to be a published writer, at some point you're going to have to send your work off to professionals, right, in the industry, and it's a terribly scary thing to do. So I guess get it written, and then try and get comfortable with sharing, even with family members or friends. Get some feedback, be open to feedback. I think that's one of the things that I found really helpful about the MA at St Mary's, is that again you had to sit around in a group and share your work, and people weren't always nicey nice then. You got some very constructive criticism, and to be able to take that and say, okay, this doesn't mean I'm a bad writer, it means that I can improve what I've done. I think that's really important.
Did you get, actually we had an author earlier saying that when they get feedback from their editor, as an example, it's good because it pinpoints where in the book they've sort of gone wrong. And this can be the same in any, if you're early on and you're sending it to friends and things and they give you feedback. And this author was saying that actually you can then take that on board as, oh, that's an issue within the book, so maybe the character's not doing something entertaining enough, or it's not working, but that you don't have to take their direct edits of how to fix it. In fact, it's just a pointer. And would you say that earlier on, when you're writing and you're sending it to people as a new author with no publishing deal, that's a good thing to bear in mind, is that actually feedback is just pointing out where maybe a plot's fallen down. You don't have to exactly follow what someone's telling you to do.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, for sure. I think if 10 people tell you that there's a problem at the same point in the book, you probably have to accept that there's a problem at that point in the book. But it's so subjective, isn't it? 10 people could read it and all find different bits that they like and don't like. It is a confidence thing. I think you have to have confidence in your own work, and that does later down the line when you get published, I think, does mean that you have to have confidence to push back. Yeah. If you're lucky enough to get an editor or an agent who's sort of saying, I want you to change this, but if you really believe in your work and you don't think it needs changing, you're allowed to do that. I think I didn't realize that so much when I had my first one, and I had my amazing agent read it. I mean, this is a good story, and I don't know if it can be shared, you can decide afterwards, but Sophie Lambert, my agent, sort of went through one section of my book, and she was like, there's way too much direct speech in this. I think you should do some reported speech. It's just too, reads like a film script. So let's just do this as reported speech. And so I changed it. It took quite a long time. It was a fairly big section. And then, I don't know, 6 weeks later, I got it back from my editor, and she's like, I don't know why you've reported all this speech. It would be way better if it was direct. So my agent just kind of emailed me, sorry. Because it's just different, right? So at the end of the day, you have to have the courage of your own convictions to a certain extent, I think. But also trust the experts, right? They know what sells. And
it's a good middle ground somewhere. I think that's really good tips though for anybody out there who's maybe got their first publishing deal, knowing, because I did not know that either. I mean, I was in the industry and I didn't know that. I knew you could disagree with the editor, obviously not that extreme, but I didn't know that actually when it came to, oh, maybe this should happen, I would always have read that as, oh, they're trying to strongly suggest this is what should happen here. But as an author, you can be like, yeah, that's a good idea, but I think I'm going to run with my idea, and then that's completely valid.
Yeah, I think, if you have a good editor you get on with really well, it becomes very collaborative, doesn't it? I've had several things where I've been, they've been, if someone says at the side, maybe this should happen, question mark, doesn't mean it has to happen.
Yeah. It must be very hard if you do feel like you have to follow instructions from somebody to then stick to an idea that you were passionate about. I can't imagine how you could write a whole book about something that you'd lost the interest in. Do you ever struggle with that, or have writer's block, or kind of lose interest in a book as you're going through?
I mean, look, like I said, I'm on 2 years working on the book I'm working on at the moment, and it's not that I've lost interest. I still actually have confidence in the idea. It's just trying to get it finished, and bearing in mind we're in quite strange circumstances now, and I've had some real ups and downs personally over the last couple of years, and it's really hard to write through emotional turmoil and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, in a way, yes, I'm sick of the book that I'm working on, but I'm incredibly stubborn, and that's another thing. I think that's another piece of advice that I would give people wanting to write, is that you can pretty much make any idea work if you stick at it. And I think a lot of people get very stressed about whether or not they have the right idea. When they start writing something, they're like, oh, this is no good, I'm going to write something else. I think if you can sort of plot a book, if you can create good characters, you can make pretty much most ideas work. And that's something that I've done with each. I've got a 4th book that I started after I finished the 3rd book, but then ended up like going back and forth with edits on it. I started a 4th book, and again, I just had this idea, and I know I'll stick with it. I'll write it to the end. And that's, I think, maybe some people tie themselves in knots wondering if they've got the right one.
Yeah.
My advice would just be like, pick an idea, stick with it.
But how do you find all of these different, do they just come to you in different ways? I mean, obviously now you live in New York, whereas before you were obviously in London and Guernsey. Do you think any of these play, like these, I don't know, moving to New York, would that have played into your slight change of genre, or is it just completely non-related to that and you just had a random idea?
I think the book that I'm working on now is definitely, I do think I'm quite heavily inspired by location. Like I said, certainly for the first 2 books. And then we moved to this lovely suburban town, and I'm instantly thinking, what could go wrong here? Like, yeah. how can I ruin this place fictionally? And then the 4th book that I started working on, I read an article in the New Yorker about a woman that kept disappearing and turning up, not knowing where she'd been, and I had a kind of like, oh, that would be amazing. Like, imagine if that happened to somebody here. And then I do think about things like Hurricane Sandy was a big event that hit the coast along here, and I'm like, oh, it'd be amazing to set something in Hurricane Sandy. So I do very much think about, I think, location first, and I find location very inspiring.
And do you have any silver bullets for when you're struggling for an idea and you just need an extra bit of inspiration? So whether it's in the writer's block or getting the words on paper in a day. For Lauren, it's the shower. She gets all her best ideas in the shower.
So strange.
I don't think it's strange. I hit the shower all the time. I will spend such a long time in the shower under really hot water just thinking. I think the shower is a great place to think.
Yeah.
I don't know about other people. I know a lot of writers talk about having to get into the flow and have undisturbed time. And I don't know if it's a product of having started writing when my youngest was not yet 2 years old. I have never got into the habit of sitting down for 2 or 3 hours at a time and writing. I really do. I read a great article a while ago about a writing mum who talked about writing around the edges, and that's always what I've done. Like, I will sometimes write 3 or 4 sentences and then go make some sandwiches and then come back and then write another couple of sentences. Like, it really does take me a long time to get through things, but I don't mind that I'm not fully immersed in it. I can come to my work and be like, oh, let's do 2 paragraphs and then let's do whatever else I need to do.
Wow. That's really.
I think that's so inspiring that there's so many people that want to get into writing and feel like they can't manage it with a young family and with work, and so to hear that advice, like, just do what you can when you can, I think is really motivating.
Definitely.
Oh, I'm glad. And it's honestly, maybe it doesn't work for everyone. Maybe there are people that really need to, you know, surround themselves with the right environment and really get into it. But I've written now 3 books around the edges, like really just fitting it in. And like, I take my laptop everywhere. So like, I'll drop one of the kids off at a football practice and I'll get the laptop out and I won't write for an hour. I might just do a paragraph and then I might go on Twitter or whatever. But it's just getting it done in these tiny increments. I don't know, I'm quite a whimsical, flighty kind of person, so it just suits me to do it in these little bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
Would you read back, like, if you say when you're writing, and because you're sort of like fitting it in around the edges, as you say, would you read back much from your previous like time writing, or do you kind of just get straight into it without really looking back too much of what you've already written?
I think I'll do a mixture of both. I sort of feel like I work on sections. So because, for example, now I'm doing these edits really and just trying to build characters and things. I will do the book that I'm working on now has 3 main characters, and I just finished doing Kate. So I've just finished going through the whole thing and just like trying to add depth and nuance to her. And now I'm doing Lydia. So I'll go back to the beginning and do that. And then once I've done all that, I will probably do a really in-depth read through again from the beginning. But at the moment, it's like open the laptop, whatever paragraph is flashing up, I'll be like, right, what needs doing here?
Well, I think just the barrier of getting down and doing it, you know, all the authors we speak to, I think about trying to get a dissertation done at uni, and you know, just how awful I was at going back and doing that edit process and looking at it with fresh eyes. So I think that's really, really inspiring. You've mentioned community quite a lot and sharing your work with other people. Do you have a kind of crime community, a group of criminals, as it were, that you would share your work with, or that you would talk to about your books? Because it seems to us like the crime authors community is quite tight.
I would say, yeah, it's a very generous, very friendly community for sure. And I feel like Harrogate every year in July is like the crime writing community's mecca. And I've made some really good friends there. I mean, I'm not sure you know, the whole imposter syndrome and confidence issues really don't go away when you get published. I would be very loath to share my sort of unpublished work with any of my crime writer friends. I tend to get my husband to read the first draft, and then I would pick probably friends that I know read a lot and get their feedback, and then I trust my agent's feedback. And maybe at the next level, like if I, for example, with this 3rd book, like if I was under contract, I would probably feel more confident maybe sharing with a couple of my close crime writing friends.
With crime, what do you think it is that makes the genre just so tantalizing and, you know, never seems to go out of fashion?
I think there is comfort in a lot of the familiarity of crime novels. There are certain sort of pulse points through a crime novel that you kind of know you're going to hit, and I love that. I sort of, again, like I said it earlier, I'm not saying there's a formula to crime writing, but there is a bit of a formula to crime writing, and I love that. I love to read a book knowing that the detectives are going to stumble across some issues and they're going to fall out, and you know, maybe someone's going to have an affair with someone, and then everything's going to get tied up at the end. I kind of love that and take comfort in that. And then there's the whole thing, isn't it, that people like to kind of be inside looking out at horrible things happening. Again, I think you take comfort from being in bed with a scary book, knowing that none of those things are happening to you.
Just going to say, can you ever envisage a detective series where there are no problems at home? Someone is just happy going in, doing their 9 to 5, finds a serial killer, and then they're at home watching X Factor, happy as Larry. Is that going to be there in the future?
I think it would be quite a new take on the whole genre, wouldn't it? I'm not. Maybe that's what needs to be written.
One of our authors that we're speaking to for Crime Week has a very happy home life. The wife kind of keeps everything in shape. That's probably the only one I've come across. It just seems that you need something gritty going on at home to maybe. I don't know.
It speaks more to what we think. I wonder, you know, the kind of person that's drawn to being a detective and dealing with these murky issues. Maybe we assume that they have things in, maybe if they weren't the kind of slightly conflicted, tortured souls that they are, they'd be doing different jobs. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
And maybe even the fact that they work so many random hours and they're always having to, you know, see really quite horrible stuff, maybe that sort of just affects their personal life. So you would imagine that somebody who's a detective who's working all the time would not have the best personal life.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to take a toll on your marriage and stuff, isn't it? If you're working night shifts and all hours and completely consumed by trying to find the latest serial killer.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, dealing with the kind of characters that you throw their way is definitely going to have a psychological toll on an inspector after a while, isn't it? Where can our community find your books that are out, and where can they find you online if they want to talk to you about them?
So I have a Facebook author page, which you can like and join. I have a website, laradearman.com. I say that tentatively because I haven't been on it for a while, but I'm pretty sure it's still up and running. It probably needs a little update. My books are available in all good bookshops and obviously at Amazon and other online retailers. And
you're big on Twitter as well, aren't you? Can't forget Twitter.
I love a bit of Twitter.
Lara's a good one to follow, guys. What is your hash? Is it just at Lara Dearman?
Yes, I'm the original Lara Dearman. Don't follow any copycat account. No.
Well, thank you so much for all the time you've given us today. It's been such a brilliant interview, and I think so many inspirational things that people will feel when they listen to this. They're just going to be inspired to pick up that notebook whenever they've got 5 or 10 minutes, which I think is incredible.
Yeah,
very well. So nice to chat to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We can carry